Hello, everybody. Tommy Tables here, and I am once again thrilled to welcome you to another Genre Guys. Today, we are going to be talking about directions, specifically heading north and then possibly going northwest, perhaps. I don't know. That's all I got. It was a pretty bad joke, I guess. Anyway, hello, welcome to...
It's a joke that encompasses many things.
Yeah, there you go.
I made a worse one to get you off the hook.
I appreciate that. Well, it is the movie North by Northwest, which is an Alfred Hitchcock classic, probably one of his most well-known. You can see Cary Grant there in the background running away from the crop dusting plane. This was, I guess, in this case, it looks like Google or Britannica rather, has helped me out with this. This is a classic thriller genre. Would you guys say that that's correct?
Yeah, and specifically the idea of the man who is on the run because people think he's somebody he's not, and vice versa.
Right. And so this was made in 1959, which is a bit of an older film, but at the same time, it still has quite a few modern touches. It was colorized. It had...
Oh, it's in color.
It's in color. Yeah, it's in color.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's what I meant.
In VistaVision, which for those who don't know is basically 70 millimeter with a little alteration, which means the cameras are huge and the film is huge, and it's very good for that.
Well, what I found interesting was right at the beginning of the film, it said something along the lines of the actors, characters, and descriptions of scenes or places in this film are all fictitious. Or they didn't call it a film. They're all fictitious. They called it a photo play or some other sort of word.
Yeah, well, photo play is sort of another word for screenplay, but...
yeah. Well, anyway...
The disclaimer is interesting because they're trying to tell you that the spies in the film are not based on any real spy agencies, I guess.
Sure. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Well, why don't we get into a quick little debrief or a little overview about what this film is about. Lorn, would you like to do the honors this time?
It's kind of hard to talk about the plot of the film without spoiling it, at least through the midpoint. But the gist of the thing is that you have an advertising executive, think in the era just slightly before Mad Men,
right?
Who is going to be meeting some of his associates at a restaurant. And there's a case of mistaken identity where he gets picked up and kidnapped by these thugs with vaguely European accents who take him to what I would call a
palatial mansion.
That's the best way to put it. Yeah, it's quite a manor, and he sees as they are entering the grounds that the name Townsend is attached to it, and he's protesting the entire time. He tries to escape a couple of times, but the thugs that are surrounding him and the locked doors that he encounters prevent him from escaping, until eventually a gentleman comes into the room and starts calling him by another name. And he keeps protesting that, no, he's not this guy. And the man who's trying to question him is trying to say, give up this charade. We know who you are. Just tell us what you know and we can be done with all of this.
You almost expect him to say, drop the pretenses, Mr. Bond.
Yeah, it's that kind of a scene. And because he is not this person that they think he is, they decide that, okay, we're going to have to kill him. And so they pour an entire bottle of bourbon down him and then stick him in a car and start rolling it down a hill towards a cliffside. But he manages to drunkenly grab hold of the wheel, and there is a car chase during which he is very inebriated. He's pursued by these guys who are trying to kill him, and eventually by the cops as well. And there is an accident.
Just interrupt you. Here he is, as they're preparing to give him basically a pint glass full of bourbon, which I thought was a very interesting way of doing somebody in. Yeah. Anyway, go on.
Well, there is this crash, and the thugs who are pursuing him see that the police have got him in custody, and so they kind of back off. And as he's being booked and tested for whether or not he's drunk, which he obviously is, he's trying to tell them that there's these guys that are trying to kill him, and there were two of them, and they grabbed him and they poured all this bourbon down him, and of course the police don't believe him, and he's arraigned the next day, and they decide that because the lawyer basically vouches for him, says that he's known him for 7 years and that he's a guy of good character, that, okay, we'll go ahead and we'll check out the story. And so they take him back to the manor where he had been taken before. And he's met there by somebody who claims to know him. And she says, well, you were at this party last night and you'd already arrived a little bit drunk. And as the party wore on, supposedly he drank some more, left early, and that was that. And so he's trying to claim, well, no, this room had this cabinet that was filled with all of these exotic liquors. Now it's filled with books. And he obviously, they think that he's just trying to get out of this fine. Even his mother, who is there with him, who had sprung him from jail with a lawyer, they all think that he's just making this up.
Nobody believes him. He is absolutely frustrated because nobody will believe this crazy story he's telling.
It wasn't me, officer. It was the one-armed man.
Yeah, and honestly, that's a very similar kind of story, you know.
Yes.
And so even his mother tells him, just pay which this made me laugh, pay the $2 fine. So anyway, things kind of take off from there. Lou, I'll let you kind of pick up from there to see how deep into this.
Well, I don't think it's terrible to do a little spoiling here.
I think
he keeps being mistaken. He keeps getting involved in this plot deeper. And finally, what turns out is that the good guys, led by Leo G. Carroll, who later went on to play basically the same part in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. as the head of the spy agency, have created a fictitious spy. He doesn't really exist. But somehow, these bad guys from points to the east somewhere, we never really hear where, believe that Cary Grant is that guy. And the good spies say, well, we'd like you to kind of keep playing him so we can play them. And he gets involved in a bad moment at the United Nations and decides he better get on a train and get out of there. And they go to the New York train station and they take the train to Chicago, hence going north by northwest, and eventually wind up in a cornfield where this crop duster is trying to kill him. He meets up with Eva Marie Saint, who is the cool spy double agent sort of lady.
I was going to say the femme fatale.
Yes, and
she's actually the reason that this fictitious agent exists, because she's implanted with the villains, and they don't want the villains to realize that she's there in amongst them. So they've created this fictitious villain that they believe, or this fictitious spy that they believe is on their tail.
And from there, we wind up at the bad guy's house, which just happens to be overlooking Mount Rushmore.
On top of Mount Rushmore? Yeah.
Yes.
It's like right beside
And there's
it.
the big climactic chase,
right
and, all's well that ends well. And there's other scenes we could go into. There's an auction, and, again, things in hotels and trains. And this is a planes, trains, and crop duster mobiles kind of movie. But all where everybody else is taking it very seriously. But, of course, Cary Grant, who's absolutely indignant at being used this way and who's scared to death for his life, is also so charming and funny and elegant that, you're instantly on his side and instantly want to see how he gets himself out of it. And among the other players, the head villain is James Mason, who is wonderfully sophisticatedly oily. And Martin Landau is his number one assistant. And it's one hell of a ride. It is one hell of a ride. Now, Ernest Lehman, who wrote the script, said that Hitch said to him, I've got this idea where something bad happens at the United Nations. And his version was that the person speaking at the podium in the United Nations says, I will not say another word until the representative of Peru wakes up and starts paying attention. And so one of the ushers goes over, puts his hand on his shoulder, and the guy falls over dead. So Hitch had that idea to start the movie, and at the end he said, I want to have people chasing themselves across Mount Rushmore. In between, you fill it in. And so Lehman went to work and came up with this wonderful, wonderful tale.
And if you look on the screen, this is Martin Landau.
Very young. Yep.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Like, was he in his 20s there? Like,
Yeah,
jeez.
roughly. And as I've told you guys, Landau, I actually saw. They did like all these movies. They've done restored versions to bring them up to snuff. And I
Mhm.
happened to go to the premiere of that in Glendale, California, at the Alex Theater. And the special guest speaker for the Q&A afterwards was Martin Landau.
Wow.
And he told the story that Cary Grant came to him and gave him his tailor's card and said, I've already arranged it for him to make you a few suits for this thing because you have to look really elegant and the studio is not going to do you justice. So it's on me. And Landau was just blown away by that. And Landau also said many years later that he and Cary Grant had become kind of friends during this. But many, many, many years later, Cary Grant once turned to him and said, Martin, you know, we've both done good things, bad things, whatever, but that North by Northwest, we finally did something right because
Wow.
the picture became so beloved and such a, well, classic.
Well, you know,
It's also interesting that this picture was one of the last for a long time of these big, lush color studio movies. That right after this is when the Hitchcock TV show happened. And that led him to think, you know what, I could do a little black and white movie and be scary too. And the next picture, if it's not a total complete contrast, Psycho.
yeah.
So you go from North by Northwest to Psycho.
Well, you know, it's interesting about North by Northwest. One of the things that struck me, and I've sort of thrown this picture up on the screen, is that you get these really amazing visuals, framing. I'm not sure how quite to describe it, but you've got all these iconic shots in there. Like you've got this scene in particular where he's kind of standing outside in the middle of nowhere and just sort of desolate.
Well, look at that picture, though. And I think part of what this is demonstrating is that the very beginning of the picture throws the audience because everybody is insisting that he is this guy. And nobody is backing him up, and no evidence is really backing him up. And it starts making the audience a little bit uneasy. And what you're creating is a sense of paranoia. And that's exactly what you get in that photo right there.
Yes. And by the way, that Kansas cornfield was in Bakersfield, California. They literally built it. But the cameraman, I watched an interview with him, and he said, I told Hitch, we have a problem. We can see Bakersfield in the background, and we'll have to do a matte shot. And the problem was, to get all of these shots, they had to put the camera on a big crane, not even a regular movie camera crane, but basically a platform hanging from a construction crane. And he said, with a matte shot, you have to keep everything very, very stable so the matte doesn't wiggle on the horizon. So they worked out a way to tie the bucket of this thing by four corners and secure it from the wind and from movement of the crane and made it work. So way in the distance there, that's a mat covering the city of Bakersfield showing up in the distance in the haze.
And that's actually something that we should talk about too, is that they used every trick in the book on this movie. They used matte paintings, they used front projection, they used rear projection, they used forced perspective, they used models. It was just a little bit of everything.
Part of the model stuff was not anticipated. Some of it was. When they got to Mount Rushmore, the Park Service got wind of it and said, no way are we letting you climb across the National Monument. Forget it. And in fact, when it got out in the newspapers, some angry columnist wrote something and said, maybe Mr. Hitchcock should go back to England and make a picture on the face of the Queen.
Oh, my.
You know, they were outraged. And then Hitchcock, I haven't been able to find the picture, but I saw it in one of these little making of movies. Hitchcock put out a thing with the four presidents, and over on the right, the fifth profile was his. As if he was part of Mount Rushmore. And this was something that happened all through the movie. When they were in New York City shooting on the street, Hitchcock had made some derisive mention about the New York City Police Department because rather than just assigning them a crew for all their locations, every time they went to a new setup, a whole new bunch of cops showed up expecting to get paid again, and it was costing a young fortune.
Oh, my.
And so Hitch called them, instead of New York's finest, New York's worst. And the cops said, okay, fine, we're just not going to show up. So they had no security in those scenes on Madison Avenue. The other one was the United Nations didn't want them shooting in the building and didn't want anything to do with them. So the scene at the beginning where Cary Grant goes up the steps outside the United Nations, that was shot from a hidden camera inside a fake carpet cleaning truck across the street.
No
So that the
kidding.
UN wouldn't know they were doing it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is wild. I mean, that was one of the things that stood out to me. I mean, obviously you would see the sort of I guess the matte screens or the fake backgrounds when they were driving in the cars and whatnot, but the consistent use of all of these special effects was something that I was a little surprised by. And this sort of answers a bit of it in the sense that a lot of people really didn't want them around.
Oh, and a great moment to look for in this movie is one of the most famous bloopers in the history of the movies, really. There is a scene where Eva Marie Saint pretends to shoot Cary Grant with a blank pistol.
Mm-hmm.
Watch that scene very closely over to the right in the gap between the two of them. This was take 4, 5, 6, 7, and in the back, among the extras who are sitting at this kind of dining room in this, there's a little kid who, a couple of seconds before the shot, puts his fingers in his ears.
Oh, okay.
Because he knew what was coming. He knew there was going to be a bang. And Eva Marie Saint, in the clip I saw of her talking about it, although I'd heard about it before, said, I don't know why that take had to be the one we used, but it's kind of funny.
Wow. Well, one of the observations that I had about this, though, is the fact that you don't really know what's going on. Like Lorn said, you're sort of confused with Cary Grant throughout this movie, up to the point where you're almost thinking that this is a almost like a Total Recall type of scenario where he actually is the spy. He doesn't
Which is a
realize
great
it.
comparison movie too, by the way.
Yeah.
Is this kind of Total Recall in a different way?
But then you have that cut to the FBI, and you've got the FBI director and his colleagues kind of all sitting around thinking like, so who is this guy? Like, how did he end up getting enmeshed in this?
Yeah. How did we get a real guy when we thought we just had a fake?
Yeah. And the answer of the FBI, I thought, was really telling in the sense that, well, this is our really great fortune. And then, someone's like, well, what are we going to do? This guy's going to get killed. And the response was, well, them's the breaks. And
the only reason that they actually do take an interest in him later is because Eva Marie Saint actually has fallen for him. And that's kind of also an interesting thing about this movie. It's not just a straight thriller. It's also a bit of a romance.
Absolutely.
And it's got some comedy in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. In fact, Eva Marie Saint said, there was no rehearsal. They told her, well, you fall in love with Cary Grant. She said, I can do that. And they just shot. So, and she also said Cary Grant was kind of famously a cheapskate. And he used to charge people 25 cents for an autograph. And she thought, oh, that's nice. He's giving it to charity. And then she decided maybe it wasn't for charity. Maybe he was just keeping it.
Well, one of my favorite scenes that actually made me laugh out loud in the movie was there's a moment when he is trying to escape his hospital room that he's been locked in, and he shimmies out. He goes in through the next window, and the light comes on, and there's a woman in a hospital bed there, and she shrieks and says, "Stop!" And then she looks at him and she says, "Stop."
Yeah, there's a lot of fun. One of the fun things, they shot in the Plaza Hotel at the beginning in New York, and as it happens, Cary Grant had an apartment upstairs in the Plaza for years and had it then. Oh. And the scene was him coming in the door, walking through the lobby, and turning off towards the Oak Room. And somebody asked Hitchcock, aren't you going to give him any direction? And he said, he does this every day of his life. How can I direct him on how to walk across this lobby? So, and about his direction, Landau said there was a scene where after they did a take, Hitch went up to Cary, and then Hitch went up to James Mason, and then Hitch went up to Eva Marie Saint, and each whispered something in their ear and didn't come to him, and he felt kind of left out. And he went over and he said, Mr. Hitchcock, haven't you got anything for me? He said, my boy, the only time you'll hear from me is if you're doing something wrong. He said, so far you are projecting wonderfully.
And as is a tradition for Hitchcock, he does make a small cameo right at the very beginning of the movie.
Yeah, and he started that way back, and even in the silent days, and suddenly everybody was looking for it. So then he realized it had to happen at the very beginning of the movie, or it would interrupt the flow of the movie and distract people.
Ah,
so that's why it was always at the beginning in his later movies. I thought
it was pretty quick. Yeah. Well, going back to what I was saying though about the FBI, and this might be a bit of my naivete showing here. However, they really weren't portrayed in a very positive light in this movie. And in fact, you really could see, like, I almost wonder if this movie had not kicked off the trend of, how do I put this? Distrust of the alphabet agencies, perhaps.
Well, of course, Hitchcock was famously afraid of police.
Right.
Because when he was a little boy, he did some minor thing, and his father, to teach him a lesson, got the local lockup in their neighborhood in London to put him in a cell for several hours. And from that point on, he admitted that he had a pathological fear of policemen. So how much that influenced his work, I don't know, but a lot, apparently.
I mean, oh, sorry, one more.
This is also right in the very middle of the Cold War. And you had a lot of spycraft going on, a lot of skullduggery between nations. There was a paranoia as a sense of things at the time. So I think that just plays into it.
Well, and remember that Hitchcock, during World War II, made Saboteur with Bob Cummings, and that ended in a big chase moment on the Statue of Liberty. So he kind of covered his national monuments in intrigue.
Yeah. Statue of Liberty.
By the way, I discovered a very fascinating 6 degrees of separation.
Okay, hit us.
Do you know what Cary Grant's father's first name was?
Darth?
Well, you know Cary Grant's real name was Archibald Leach.
I did not know that. Okay.
Yeah, his father was Elias Leach.
Oh.
So Elias Disney, Elias Leach, 6 degrees of separation, at least for our channel's sake.
Well, if I remember right, there's actually a pretty good biopic that's coming out about Cary Grant called Archie, if I remember.
Yeah, there is one, and I looked at it, and I thought it wasn't very good, personally, but that was just me. And I just watched a documentary about him, and it was interesting that the documentary had very little to say and nothing good about Diane Cannon, but which I read her book, which was fascinating, because most people don't know Cary Grant was one of the very first people who really started experimenting with LSD.
I did not know that.
Oh, yeah. And found it therapeutic. But Diane Cannon is completely in control of that series I think it's on Amazon, of Archie, or maybe it's on Paramount Plus. I forget which. And it's okay, but I don't know. I thought it was a little too psychologically whatever for its own good, but the
a little
part
too
of it
psychedelic.
No, it was the deep-rooted motivations of why he was the way he was, and I'm going, give the guy a break. He did what he did,
Right.
In fact, he's gotten funny. Pauline Kael said, he learned how to play Cary Grant, and that's what he played his whole career. And then the other funny things that happened, for a brief while, because he was married, I think, 5 times. He was married to the Woolworth heiress, Barbara Hutton, who was a zillionaire. And so the headlines called the marriage, are you ready? Cash and Cary.
Nice.
And of course, he'd made 3 other movies before this with Hitch, Suspicion and Takes a Thief. And I forget what the 4th one is. Anyway.
Well, so on that note, there's one scene where, I mean, there are a number of scenes that really stand out in this movie for me, and I think one of them was when he was getting when they were trying to do him in the first time, and they're like, "Here's your giant bottle of bourbon," and I thought it, like, the alcohol that they were trying to serve him, that there was some sort of poison or something in there. But no, they just sort of filled up, like I said, a pint glass and shoved it down his throat.
If he's murdered, there'll be questions asked. If it's a car crash, oh well, another tragedy of our highways.
But I'm just surprised he was able to, he didn't vomit it all out or something. I mean, that's a lot of bourbon. My gosh.
I did feel like the drunk scene was a little overplayed, but
yeah,
I mean,
but
you can forgive it for the rest of the movie.
And I think what saves it, really, Lorn, is Jessie Royce Landis, who plays his mom, who comes and bails him out, because she was such a wonderfully, what's the word? Not exactly over the top, but she just played this flibberty-gibbet, wonderful society dame so well, and she did it in a lot of movies. It kind of became her stock and trade, that she's so out there that the drunk part sort of gets toned down by comparison. Not much, but some.
Well, but I mean, on the drunk part, though, they did allude to it, right? Like, because at the very beginning of the film, when he is meeting with his other advertising colleagues, he had a line about, you guys have already started, but I'll be able to catch up
pretty quick.
Yeah.
Quick.
So that, I thought, helped to make sense of the fact that when he woke up and he was, hammered out of his mind driving this car, he was at least able to control it somewhat.
Yeah.
Well, it takes us back to that issue that I mentioned, I think I forget which movie, but where Eli Wallach said that John Huston gave him the best direction about playing a drunk. He said, "You know what drunks do, Eli? They try hard not to look drunk." And that's the way Eli played it in The Misfits, and it worked. So Cary was a little broader, of course, but he knew what his audience wanted, and he was this is a guy who came from absolutely nothing, and when he got there, he was absolutely not going to blow it. A friend of mine that I think I have mentioned before, Stanley Ralph Ross, God bless him, was a writer, and at one point on those little bungalow offices on the back lot, he and Cary shared one where each had their own office but shared a secretary. And he used to go to lunch with him a lot. And he said one day Cary Grant said to him, "Stanley, you are a talented man, and you will work a lot in this business. And then you won't. And then you will. And then you won't. And it will make no sense. So my advice to you, buy real estate."
That's good advice. Very, very good advice in this day and age.
Especially then.
Yeah,
It
no
was cheaper.
kidding.
But look, people out there, if you've never seen this, it's a roller coaster ride. It's just a lot of fun. And even the very serious stuff and the dangerous stuff, it's Cary Grant. He's going to come out of it okay. So you're rooting for the good guy, and the bad guys are suave enough to be interesting. And the girl, I mean, look, even Marie Saint up to this point had played all these kind of saintly people, and supposedly Hitchcock told her, "That's over. You're only going to be playing sexy femme fatales from now on after this movie." But she said, "I wanted to do it all," so she did the other kind too. But compare this to On the Waterfront, and compare this to some of her other stuff where she was, so fresh. In fact, she told a story. She said that Hitchcock did not like the costumes that MGM's costume department designed for her. So one day he took her in New York to Bloomingdale's, and they picked out, based on the models doing the fashion shows in the department store, all the clothes for her for the whole movie, and he paid for it. And so later she said, "Hitchcock was my sugar daddy because he took me shopping at Bloomingdale's."
Wow. That's hilarious.
But between that and what Cary did with Martin Landau and whatever, they understood that clothes said something about a character, that haircut said something about a character, that all of these things gave the audience a visceral feeling for who these people were. And of course, especially with a movie where it's about, in the joke trailer that you can find out there, Hitchcock says, "Are you planning your vacation? May I suggest a trip of some 2,000 miles?" And he has a map of North by Northwest. And he understood that this was, although it was trains and other things, this was our speeding train ride. This was just as speeding train ride as old Buster Keaton comedies or that sort of thing. And if you stop too long and think about it, you might find holes, but that's not the kind of picture it is. It's the kind of picture where you say, "Okay, this is crazy, but it's fun, and I'm going to go along for the ride." And if you take it with that intent, you're going to have a swell time.
Something about that trailer as well strikes me as something that we could use today too, in that there's two things about that trailer that struck me. The first is that Hitchcock promises to provide nothing but entertainment. He says that this is going to be an entertaining picture, and I promise that if you come, you'll be entertained.
Right.
The other is they were making a point of getting the audience out to see it on the big screen because it was like nothing else. And it made me wonder if that was put in there specifically because TV was becoming competition for them.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. Absolutely. And of course, VistaVision and all these widescreen processes, just like 3D, just like Smell-O-Vision to a lesser degree, were all there to compete with the little TV screen.
Mm-hmm.
Because let's remember, the movie studios were scared to death of TV. They thought, why will people pay for a ticket if they can see it for free at home?
I just think it's interesting that we're still basically fighting the same battles today.
Right.
Well, we're fighting to find people who care about entertaining people, but that's a whole broader topic that I must admit I've spent most of today speaking with Pro and with Jonas about in two separate videos. But about streaming versus movies versus money versus all the crazy things, and the Writers Guild, and whether or not you're qualifying in various ethnic classifications. You know, it's funny. Nobody would have ever said, well, wait a minute, we can't have Cary Grant. He's too white.
Yeah. Well, now they would.
Well, and
Yeah.
there's two things that really struck me about this movie. I got to confess, I had not seen this movie before, so this was a brand new experience.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
One is the chemistry between Cary Grant and Eva Marie Saint is electric, and they sell it. Their dialogue and their banter lines are so great in the movie, and it works. You buy into their attraction to each other. The other thing, and the thing that made the movie for me, is that this is not your traditional spy movie. Cary Grant is not a spy. And initially, when all of this starts happening, he's bewildered, he's angry, he's frustrated. But he falls into tradecraft pretty quick. He's a smart guy. He's a guy that wants to figure out what's going on. He wants to clear his name. And he starts figuring out how to be a spy without any training. And it's done in a way that is believable. He makes no leaps of logic that are beyond anything that a person could do if they sat and thought for a little bit.
He doesn't suddenly become a guy who's expert with guns or expert with defusing an atom bomb or anything like that. Exactly.
One of my favorite scenes is in that auction scene when he's got to figure out, because he's surrounded, he's going to be killed. He has to figure out, how do I get out of this? And his novel solution to that problem is really great. And I think that's what really sold me on the movie, is that he's quick on his feet and you believe it.
Yes, you absolutely believe it.
You see the origin of, I guess, all these tropes, and I can't think of another word for that, but the idea of acting crazy in order to be able to get the cops to take you away, to protect you from the bad guys who are actually out there to get you, and just all this other...
While at the time they're hunting for him for murder, I might add.
Exactly. And their headlines. And by the way, there are people out there who posit, I'm not sure I agree with them, but there's certainly a case to be made, that this is really the first James Bond movie before there were James Bond movies. That it's this elegant guy fighting the bad guys, using his wits, and certainly not as cold as the original James Bond was, which was, that's a Smith & Wesson, and you've had your six, bang. But there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, maybe. But again,
Cary Grant, certainly if he was English, well, he is English, but if he was known as an English actor, if he was a little younger, he could have played Bond.
Yeah, no, he could. And I see where you're going with that. But I mean, again, it's more of the everyman who's been thrust into this fantastic situation.
Yes.
I think if you saddled Cary, I don't think Cary Grant would work as Bond.
Maybe not.
The reliance on the gadgets, I think, would almost undermine his credibility, I think.
But at the beginning, the gadgets really weren't as big a deal. They got bigger as the time went on.
Yeah, that's true.
And also on the other end of that, of course, like I say, is Leo G. Carroll as Mr. Waverly in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. And I don't know if you know this, but in the pilot, he wasn't it. There was an actor named Will Kaluva who was the head of U.N.C.L.E., and the network didn't like him. And what's funny is they also didn't like David McCallum, and they said, get rid of that K guy. And that's who they really wanted to get rid of, was McCallum, but they thought they meant, because that was Kuryakin, the character, but they thought they meant Kaluva, the actor, and they said, who can we get in a hurry who can play the head of a spy? I know, the guy from North by Northwest. So...
that's interesting.
So, Tommy, because you also had not seen the movie before, I kind of want to get your impressions of it, because this was a brand new experience for you too.
You know what? I think. Okay, so we keep choosing these really long movies, which is both good and bad. But I enjoyed it. Right off the bat, I'll say flat out, I thought it was fun. I wanted to see a rewatch of it. I bought it on Amazon instead of just renting it. What I think I liked the most about this film, apart from the fact that you had these really great actors and you had this interesting story and whatnot, was just the best way I can describe it is maybe a bit of nostalgia for the 1950s America, because they really gave you an entire cross cut of America in this movie. You had the busy downtown New York. You had the ad executives, like at the very beginning of the movie, he's kind of, talking with his secretary and like saying like, oh yeah, like do this and call this person and send this gift and say this. Well, you said that last year. Okay, change it up and say this. And then, like a little while later, you're suddenly in these cornfields in Idaho or Iowa. I'm not sure where exactly.
Yeah, it would have been Kansas, I think.
Kansas. And then you're on Mount Rushmore, but you're on the train scenes as well. It was almost sort of like a slice of life from a bygone era. And it was really compelling watching, I thought.
Now, like the Bond films, and I think this is where you get a lot of that vibe, is that all of the architecture that you see in this movie would have been thoroughly modern at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
And even now, it's kind of astounding to look at some of that architecture. The villain's lair at the end of the thing, perched on top of Mount Rushmore, is beautiful.
Yeah.
And I'd love to have a place like that.
You and me both.
And I think that would have been a giant spectacle on the big screen because everything would have looked everything was the best of the best at that time.
And in VistaVision, it would have been sharp. It would have been clear. It would have been just massive. I mean, folks, think of 70 millimeter, and that's what we're talking about. Although VistaVision was an anamorphic 70 millimeter, basically. But if you ever see production pictures of this movie, you will see the camera, and it's like the Goodyear blimp around the film canisters on the camera because the film was so big. And I think what you said about the other thing is trains.
Yeah, trains.
It's not about airplanes. It's about trains, several trains. And the only airplane is the crop duster.
Yeah, there were trains, one plane, and some automobiles.
But it's for a very good
bus.
logical reason that they're on the train. That's a deliberate choice.
But I'm just saying, as the era, that was the mode of transportation for crossing the country. Not
so luxurious. Wow.
Yeah. Well, of course, and those trains were, for their time, pretty darn wonderful. And again, with Bond, you've got the Orient Express in From Russia with Love as the same kind of train. So,
yeah,
those were the days. This picture, by the way, was made. Originally, the budget was about a little over $3 million, and they went about $1 million over.
Okay.
And the reason they went over was that they had a very tight schedule because Cary Grant got in his contract, and Eva Marie Saint to a lesser degree in hers. He got $1,000 a day for every day over the original schedule, and she got, I think it was $200 or $300 a day for every day over the original schedule.
Wow!
And they went about a month and a half over. So,
oh my,
that stuff adds up.
Yeah, no kidding.
But still, compare that. Even if I don't know what $3.5 or $4 million, whatever it turned out to be, is in inflation-adjusted dollars, but
yeah,
I bet it's cheaper than Wish.
So here,
so Lou, this is your favorite Hitchcock movie, I think. Is that right?
I would say one of 2 or 3. Yes, absolutely.
When is the first time that you saw this? Did you see this on release in the theaters, or did you see it later?
I'm not quite that old. I would have been 6 or 7 years old when this came out. It used to run on TV all the time. I mean, so many of these movies, they ran on TV all the time. Back when we had, we didn't have 250 or 500 channels of nothing to watch like we do now, and we didn't have Turner Classic Movies and all of these revival channels. But we did have Channel 9 and Channel 11 and Channel 13, and they ran movies, by God, and ran them often. So I think certainly would have been television when I first saw it.
Did it make an impression on you the first time you saw it, or did it come
and I'd
later?
have to say, just like several of the movies we've done recently, the music.
Yeah, I was going to mention the music.
The music by Herman, who did other movies.
Bernard Herrmann. Yeah, Herman.
But the opening credits with the arrows and the skyscraper windows, and it instantly tells you people gave a damn and they're going to do something stylish, which is so different than so much that we see now. It was, and it was a huge, huge, huge hit.
Yeah, well, I was going to say the budget was $4.3 million, and it actually had a box office of $9.8 million. So it basically, more than doubled itself, which is quite good.
Domestic, and they made more everywhere else in the world too.
Yeah. So what about you, Lorn? What was your impression of this? Like, what did you like about this film?
Well, you did mention that it's long, and for me, it had a bit of a slow start. And actually, I lost my kid about 20 minutes into it, and so I was a little disappointed by that because I was hoping that he would stay for the full watch. But once it picked up, once he actually when he started investigating himself and he went back to the hotel where he thought that this fictitious agent was, it started to grab me. When he started doing his own investigation and trying to put the pieces together from there, and especially after he met the femme fatale, their chemistry was so fantastic that it's like, okay, now I'm hooked.
And I would suggest that relatively slow beginning is necessary because you got to have a baseline before you take it off a cliff.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Because Hitch had a great sense of pacing and timing and how things should work. And he was going to tell it in his own time, in his own way.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the only thing is that it used to be that movies ran for 2 hours and sometimes 2 hours and 15, 2 hours and a half. But the modern movie, for most cases, unless you're doing something like an epic, is usually about an hour and a half, hour and 45. And I've just kind of become conditioned for that.
Yeah.
Well, when you say used to be, at this time of this movie, I don't think that's true. I think this was relatively long then also. And you also have to remember, movie theaters hate long movies because they don't get as many showings a day, which means they don't sell as many tickets or as much popcorn. So, in fact, they tell the story about once upon a time in the West about Sergio Leone going to this theater on the Champs-Élysées in Paris that had played the movie for 2.5 years solid. And that's a over 3-hour movie. And everybody was praising him and cheering for him. They knew he was going to be there. And the projectionist comes down and punched him in the nose. He said, 2.5 years, and it's so slow, and it's so long, and I've been sitting there having to watch it. Because, of course, in those days, projectionists couldn't just throw a switch and go to sleep. They had to pay attention.
You had to change the reel and whatnot. Well,
do rapid splices if they burn through the negative. Yeah,
there you go.
Well, going back to the chemistry between Cary Grant and Lord,
Eva Marie Saint. Same problem I had.
Yeah, sorry. You guys are both right in the sense that there was smoldering there when they met, and you, on paper, when you sort of read the script and you see the fact or the scenario of the guys on the train, he runs into this lady, they have this witty banter, and then if seemingly within 10 minutes they're in bed with each other. But you could buy the fact that they just had this chemistry that went off the charts. And that would be enough to allay suspicions of, if you were in Cary Grant's shoes, you're wanted for murder, this random blonde lady on a train who's gorgeous is suddenly helping you and hiding you and protecting you and all of this stuff, like instant, like love at first sight almost.
I think it all comes down to her performance, though, because she is just as witty as he is.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of allays some of your concerns. She is not the typical woman that you would have seen of that era. She's what you would call a strong, independent woman. And makes it clear that she has some desires of her own, which was not normal, I think, for that period. There's a line.
Preach it.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's a line that I love, which is Cary Grant says to her, "How does a girl like you get to be a girl like you?" And I thought that's actually a clever line.
Oh yeah. And by the way, this movie, I don't know if it was the first, but it's one of the major movies of the time that got away with the train going in the tunnel as a symbol for course. Literally, the two of them clinch, and suddenly here we have a shot of the train running into the tunnel. So I bet that got a laugh. Or what it probably got was people afterwards saying, "Wait a minute, did that mean what I think it meant?"
Back to Eva Marie Saint, though, is that, and the strong independent woman thing, is that besides the fact that she is acting as a strong independent woman, she's making back then a statement within the movie itself. She makes a statement that she ended up where she is because of men like him. And you have these people that are preaching this now, that are trying to pretend that they're the first to ever do it, and that it's never been done before. This movie came out in 1959.
Yeah.
It's like, guys,
Yeah.
there is nothing at all unique about this.
Well, that's it.
In fact, Tommy, when you bring up these wonderful pages to illustrate, go pull up the image page for Eva Marie Saint and look at the other movies she did and how totally different her look is. That she's the long hair kind of Haley Millsy, Pollyanna, or the innocent sweetie against Brando in On the Waterfront. And this movie was a real switcheroo for her. And by the way, as gorgeous as she is in it and as witty and attractive, she is not Grace Kelly. She is not Tippi Hedren. She is not the typical Hitchcock sexy blonde. She has a cool that you kind of have to get into to understand her attractiveness rather than it just being all on the surface.
Yeah.
And she is still alive, by the way.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Well, this one documentary I saw on making the film, which is on the special features with the disc, she narrates it and talks all about the film all the way through.
Wow. Well, let's see if I can find a picture of her as a brunette here. That be her?
Let's see. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. But I'm just talking like, look at the one with Brando that you just left. Put that
here.
bigger.
Yep.
I mean, that's not the lady in this movie. You know what I mean?
That's true.
It
Yeah.
just isn't. And good for her that she said she wanted to play them all, and didn't want to be pigeonholed into the sweet young thing.
Yep. No. She was. I mean, everyone had had great roles in this. The FBI director as well, the professor.
Yeah.
He's sort of world weary, kind of like, yeah, okay, we should let him die. Oh wait, he's useful to us. All right, fine. I guess we can. I guess we can keep him alive for a little bit longer.
Oh, and let's see here. I want to find him. One of the bad guys is somebody that our sci-fi obscure folks would remember, Robert Ellenshaw, who, as I remember it, plays in one of the Star Trek movies, the President of Earth, not the Kittimer one, but one of the earlier ones. So
Star Trek 4?
I think so. Here, let's see. Well, the picture where they're holding him down and pouring the booze.
Yes.
It's not as good a picture, but he's the guy on the right there,
Okay.
in front of Landau.
well, don't leave Martin Landau out of sci-fi either. He was
well,
in,
of course.
Space 1999,
Yes, absolutely.
which is unbelievable that we're 25 years past there.
And still not back on the moon. I gotta bring this picture up. This is hilarious. He's like, oh God, here we go. And they asked him, they're like, what's your poison? Like, which one would you like? The bourbon,
Right.
the scotch?
Well, but when you think about it, that even is spycraft in the sense that it wouldn't be believable if he died in a crash. He was drinking scotch and he always drank bourbon and everybody knew it. Look to the left there, the three of them in the car. That's the guy I mean, the one on the left.
This one here. Yeah. This guy here.
Yeah.
Okay. So Lou,
Anyway,
tell us, what did you like about this movie? And what did you not like? What sort of fell flat for you?
first of all, my first impression is what's not to like? You got Cary Grant, you got Spies, you got Hitchcock, you got a great villain and a great heroine and great scenery and getting the movie out of the, even when it's in the studio, which was on that massive fake Rushmore set, you feel like you're really making that trip with him. And that is not so easy to do, even at MGM on a big stage. So I would say, the script, the cinematography, the editing, and of course Hitch. All of these guys were at the top of their game, and when they all got together to play together, magic happens.
Yeah.
Magic happens. And all of them had done other movies differently that were nowhere near as good. It just points out what a collaborative medium this is and how you got to have everybody, working on the same vision. And we really didn't mention this, but I think people know Hitchcock storyboarded everything.
Oh,
Every shot was already planned out. And in fact, he said shooting the movie for him was relatively boring. It was the planning it that made him excited and gave him his fun. And by the way, because he'd had experience with studio executives wanting to meddle, mostly you shoot a master and then you shoot the close-ups and then you shoot the over-shoulder shots, and he didn't do that. He storyboarded every line, every moment, and that's all he shot.
oh,
So there was only one way to cut that picture together, and that was his way.
interesting. So there's no director's cut then.
Well, no, it is the director's cut, and it is the only cut that can work. I mean, you could do it, but it would be choppy and terrible. Which is it shows you how this guy, who was not always a famous director, but he did all that from the beginning, the confidence he had in his ability,
Yeah.
and in his storytelling skills. Movies are about, as you know, Tommy, reading, I know you've been reading Mamet's book that I told you about.
Uh-huh.
It's about putting together the right pictures in the right order and the right configuration. Then it's about dialogue and acting and all the rest of it. And Hitch, of course, was the maestro.
Well, I would say that in this current day and age, we have all the folks with the confidence, but none of the actual skills, unfortunately.
Well, you see, that's what I've been saying in some of our other discussions elsewhere, that if you hand somebody a big title and a bunch of money, they think they must deserve it.
Yeah.
And the people handing it to you know that that'll be your attitude, and therefore know that you'll be manipulatable, because that can be all taken away in the next moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Hitch. When I was growing up in the business, people said, well, do you want to be like the next Hitchcock, the next Spielberg? I said, no, I want to be the next me.
Mm-hmm.
But if I had to settle for second best,
It's not a bad goal. Shoot for the stars. If you
and I
miss,
think I
you'll
told
hit
you,
the moon.
I have a very special souvenir of Mr. Hitchcock. I was assigned a parking place at Universal right after he passed away that was his.
No kidding.
And the sign with his name on it was still there, and it went into my trunk that first day, and is still with me to this day. So
Wow.
he was, and plus, of course, you got to remember, he understood, even in those cameos in the early days, and certainly with the TV show, where there was that line drawing to represent him that he walked into. He understood his persona with the audience. And if you knew anything else about him, if you just knew a little bit, if you'd just seen him interviewed once or whatever, you knew going in, I think it's a safe bet if we spend our money on this ticket that we're going to have a good time.
Yeah.
We may prefer one movie over the other. We may think that the spy movies are more interesting than the murder movies, and we may think, but we know we're going to have a good time, and we're going to be taken through to a story that works and a kind of a happily ever after.
Well, gentlemen, final thoughts. Lorn?
The only thing that I would say is I did really enjoy the movie. I'm glad we got a chance to watch it. This kind of came about because one of our viewers messaged me through Twitter and requested that we do a Hitchcock review, and I pitched it to the guys, and everybody liked it. So thank you for that suggestion, person who reached out to me. I'm glad that we did it. It's been a lot of fun.
And everybody out there, keep reaching. Pros always keep growing and keep having fun. I'm saying keep reaching.
Keep reaching.
And I don't just mean
like
Jack
that.
Reacher. Because you suddenly will say, oh, and we'll go, oh, yeah, what about that? Or other ones will say, oh, no, let's not do that. But either way, we pay attention.
Yeah, and I mean, there is such a massive back catalog of quality, and you really don't get a sense of, you really don't sort of understand how much has come before until you start kind of diving into it. Like, this is, this genre guys thing has been opening me up to all these fantastic films that I'm kind of kicking myself for having missed before. And so please, members of the audience, members of the Pro Channel, keep those suggestions coming. We love them. We want the feedback. We want to hear from you. If you've got, a hidden gem that you don't think people are aware of, let us know. We'll watch anything. Well, maybe.
Yeah, sure. But I would also say, if you take our suggestions, and if you, like some of us, haven't seen these and you see them, whether you pay the rental fee online or whatever, and you like them, buy a disc so you own it.
Yeah.
Because God only knows what's going to happen. When they start putting trigger warnings on Snow White, and and they start telling you, well, this is distressful. This might emotionally disturb people.
This isn't a safe space.
Go ahead, baby.
Trigger your misogyny, and no.
And the next step after that is that they'll re-edit things and they'll cut it out.
Yeah, that is not a far.
So assemble a library. If you haven't, assemble a library, because I'll tell you something else about these movies that we've found to enjoy. You can enjoy it again a year or two from now, and then again 4 or 5 years after that. You can have a rotating revival cinema in your living room.
Yep.
And it won't hurt. And you can then introduce new people who haven't seen them to these movies the same way we hope we're introducing them to you.
Pay it forward.
There you go.
Well, gentlemen,
pass it on. Yeah.
This was another wonderful suggestion. Thank you, member of the audience who suggested it. This was a great film to watch. Highly recommended. This was a fantastic conversation as well. And as I said before, leave your comments down below. Let us know what you think. And on that note, I will bid you all a fond adieu until the next genre, guys, and when we figure out what we're going to watch.
Yeah, I have an idea. Maybe
all right.
An idea. We all have some ideas. We've been sent some ideas. But we'll roll the cinematic dice and see where we land.
And we promise it won't be Rise of Skywalker.
Maybe South by Southeast next time. It's going to be different.
We hope you enjoyed that special presentation of The Genre Guys here on T3PO. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for more content like it. And if you want to enjoy episodes of The Genre Guys as soon as they are released, be sure to become a member at WTW Pro's YouTube channel. What were your thoughts on this amazing topic? Let us know in the comments below. And thank you for joining us here on T3PO. Please comment, like, and share this video. And don't forget to subscribe to That Park Place Podcasts Online, your source for exclusive content and highlights from WTW Pro, The Pro Show, and That Park Place for all the news that should be fun.